Hi, Kenny here, and I want to share a little shoot that I did just last week and just kind of talk about while it's still fresh. So, what I did was I spent last 4 days out of the 7 days last week photographing for Pancreatic Cancer Canada, and they were looking for stills that they could use for the following year as far as um, advertising, fundraising, and content in general. So, they approached me and asked me to cover the pelotons when they went out for their daily rides, and these, I want to say, they're athletes because they're clocking in at well over 150 kilometers a day, riding 6, 7, possibly 8 hours. And my job was to photograph and follow along. So, being someone into two wheels and photography, this was probably the perfect job. And I was pretty excited about it. So, my initial plan was to follow the group, and I've got my Rad Power Rad Runner cargo bike, electric, obviously. And my plan was originally just to keep up and ride with the group. And I was curious about how the cyclists were going to do because what I did based on the research, they could easily sustain 30 kilometers. And I thought, okay, well, my e-bike can sustain 30 kilometers, and let's see how it goes. So you might see some footage here. And the problem was when I pulled over to shoot, and a group would pass by, and a second group that was a little bit behind. By the time I packed up and turned around, they have completely left me on the first day. So I knew the e-bike was not going to be possible, and it was even dodgier to try and get back to home base, make the route back all by yourself on an electric bike. And the setup I had also had a trailer. So I decided on the following day that I would take the motorcycle. So the day started with me taking the motorcycle from Guelph to Stratford to cover the ride. And you'll see some of the footages here. I want to give you a little bit of idea what kind of equipment I'm using photography-wise and how I covered the shots. So from the get-go, first day, D7200, Nikon D7200 camera. It's a crop sensor camera. I have that attached to my 150 to, I believe, 600. Yeah, I believe it's a 150-600 Tamron. I'm not completely sure because I'm not like the details on those. It's a long telephoto lens. Let me put it that way. But it gives me a reach of 900 millimeters, and I had that packed for the first day, along with 50, a flash, a Nikon Z6. The Z6 camera I have, it's well over 5-6 years old. And it still works really well. I had that on an adapter, and on that was a 24-120 f4 lens. I think that was it, but I think I overpacked. I didn't end up using the prime. I didn't end up using the flash. It was just two bodies, two lenses for that first day, and it worked really well. I managed to shoot from the bike, and the footages were kind of interesting in that they followed really close to the riders, and I was able to catch them up close. But what it failed to do was to get ahead to some of the scenic spots, especially when the peloton got to the countryside. I was not able to keep up. So just for reference, like 30 kilometers an hour is their cruising speed. My electric cargo bike cruises at 30. There's no more to give after 30, and I was not able to catch up with the electric bike afterwards. So that meant I shifted to looking at options, and that was my motorcycle. So you guys might know I ride a Royal Enfield Bullet 350, and I was a little hesitant because I wasn't worried. I was worried about, how am I going to get by in the group? How am I going to pass a cyclist. As the first day showed up, here's a little footage of me riding to Stratford. I think this is where it's really settled in that this is going to be the way to go, because I got to Stratford, and a lot of the country roads were these easygoing, not a lot of drivers. Like the routes these cyclists were taking were very relaxed. Relaxed as far as traffic goes. So it was perfect for that job. And on the motorcycle, I was able to feel a lot safer taking alternate routes, making my way back once I was done shooting, rather than being on an electric bike. Now, the option was I could have driven, but it would have made it difficult to pass cyclists, groups of cyclists, especially on the road. I find with the motorcycle I was able to squeeze by, and most of these they're very experienced cyclists, and they know that there is room to accommodate a motorcycle. So if I go at a reasonable speed, I was able to pass them gradually, get ahead of the pack, and then I was looking for scenery to set up and shoot against. I looked for a lot of hills where the bikes would come up. That way the trailing vehicles weren't able to get in my shots. And I started off with just kind of basic coverage, and then went into some hand shots, shots throughout the landscape. And on one of the days, I even packed a drone. It's a DJI Mini 4 Pro. There's a close call that I had with it, and you'll probably see it here. The riding gear that I was carrying, basically the kit that I had on the motorcycle was 2 cameras. On one of the days, I started off with a backpack, carrying the D7200 and the Super Telephoto on my back, because I didn't trust having that gear on the motorcycle. And one of the things you got to worry about when traveling with these cameras and the motorcycle is the vibrations. So I don't use super duper expensive, Z8. I don't have any of that gear yet, but I was using fairly old gear that I thought was reliable, and I was willing to take the risk. So on the bike goes the Z6 with a 24-to-120, and that took a lot of the vibrations from the bike, but it held up really well. I have no issues with loading photographic equipment on a motorcycle, provided that they're fairly well padded, and they can the cameras needed to be easily accessible. So I did a little rig, and I was on the following days I was able to ditch a lot of gear. I carried essentially 2 cameras. There was 2 thermos, one with water, the other with coffee. An extra pair of gloves, riding gloves, just because if it got wet, you don't want to risk having wet gloves or anything that's just gonna ruin your riding, the tactile feelings. First aid kit, a multi-tool, extra T-shirt / rag, baby wipes for cleaning windshields, cleaning visors. Oh, what else did I miss? Did I miss anything else? I think that's the minimum. That was maybe a snack or 2, but that was all I carried on the motorcycle. And one of the days I had a drone, but due to the close call, I decided not to use the drone. The issue with drones in these situations was that in some of the less windy areas, it was urban. You got to watch for wires. While you still have to watch for wires when you're out in the countryside, it got really windy. And a couple times where I pulled over the side of the road and I launched the drone, I didn't get ahead far enough, and by the time the program's loaded, the software loaded, the peloton had already passed by. And I'm consistently amazed by how fast these cyclists are traveling. And to be able to catch them on the motorcycle, a couple times I underestimated how fast they were coming at me and how far I needed to go ahead. So the motorcycle gave a lot of flexibility in how far I could go, where I could pull over as well, because With a car, the pulling over is not always an option. Sometimes there's a few tight spots where a motorcycle would fit. There was one time where I pulled over and I went up a switchback, and this is through the Forks of the Credit. If you're familiar with that, it's near Caledon. I had been dreading riding this switchback for the longest time, and because I live near the Forks, I've surveyed it in Google Maps and I've checked it out, but I've never rode up that switchback, and I realized that riding a motorcycle and doing that, the fear was more psychological. When I got there, I knew this was the route I had to take. As long as you took your time, I was okay. So I was one of the dodgier times in finding these spots was I went up the switchback and I had to pull over to the side of the road. And due to the kickstand being on the grass, I did pick up one of those little pads that allowed it's like a foot for your kickstand so that you could park in like a little bit riskier areas. And that allowed me to get into some tight spots. And sometimes the cyclists were mentioning like they didn't even see the bike. It was in the bushes, and I was just popping out with cameras. So as far as shooting goes, I shoot completely manual. And one of the things in my thought process sometimes is I would shoot with the telephoto until the group got close. But shooting with the telephoto meant that I had a reach of up to like 900 millimeters. And I was able to shoot them as they came in, and then used a closer wide lens, my 24 to 120, for when they got by me and they were zipping by. So it gave me two varieties of shots every time I pulled over. The telephoto and the reason I shoot manual, honestly, is really just because it's less modes to switch through. And I've always shot in manual. I've shot in manual for a long time. Reason for that is I find it simpler. You adjust your shutter speed, you adjust your aperture, and you have a button to shoot. The only thing I did different with this setup was that I moved my autofocus points a lot. Most of the time, if I shoot events and very standard stuff, the only thing I ever control while I'm shooting is aperture, shutter speed. I really don't even use my autofocus points. Like, I don't shift them. They're center set. It usually traditionally has the strongest autofocus lock, the most accurate lock, I would say. And I just reframe because that process is much more efficient. I know some people use they'll use back button focus and they'll use the different modes, but in fast moving situations, that ends up being very inefficient. And especially when you're doing like 500, 1,000 photos a day, going through those modes constantly, it just didn't make much sense to me. I've always traditionally shot raw, and that's just probably a habit. Really just, and I don't do excessive editing on my photos, just due to the volume. But I just find that raw just gives me a little bit more flexibility should I need it. So yeah, how did the Royal Enfield Bullet 350 perform? How it handled? Again, I'm fairly new to riding, and the bike itself did really well. And I like the fact that it's not for this situation. It was perfect. I was following cyclists through the countryside, and it's not a overly large, threatening, bubbly 1,000cc, bike. It's very easygoing, and I felt that riding next to these cyclists wasn't, going to be this freakish thing, right? And it's not a speed bike. And we did go on some rough roads, and it was just the perfect bike for the job. So I felt really good about riding that bike through all the conditions. Luckily, there was no excessive rain, so I didn't have to do any, deal with that. But the bike was fully capable of doing the job, and I, passing these cyclists, I didn't feel like I was blowing them off the road or anything like that. Yeah. And I I racked up, I believe, about 600 kilometers in a week of riding and following these cyclists. So it was a lot of fun. Um, it was a great combination of just doing photography and riding the motorcycle in the countryside. And there's, two of my favorite things right there out of things I enjoy. But a lot of my work is around charities and foundations and nonprofits. And I want to talk about photography as a working photographer. Like, I enjoy a lot of these events because, unlike commercial work, nothing is too staged. And I'm giving a lot of freedom to execute and create images without a lot of supervision, which I enjoy. And part of the reason I do photography, or I'm a professor as well, is really and riding motorcycle is like I like doing things where people aren't breathing down my neck. So this is great. And shooting for charities, nonprofits, it's great. Pancreatic Cancer Canada is fundraising for their 400,000 target, and as you know, pancreatic cancer is the most devastating cancers out there. And everything they're doing, from even the most recent trend of using your genetics to advance cures in pancreatic cancer, being there, actually hearing the stories from the survivors, knowing that pancreatic cancer is just it can be such a death sentence, and learning about the ongoing fight against pancreatic cancer, what the survival rates are, and seeing people that are this resilient and coming out the other side despite all these obstacles is really inspiring. And if you're curious and you want to make a donation, I will provide a link to Pancreatic Cancer Canada should you feel like making a charitable donation. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, please post some comments, and I'd be happy to answer anything. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.